Our speaker today is Dr. Kathleen Hartman. Dr. Hartman is an aquatic animal health veterinary staff officer for USDA-APHIS Veterinary Services. Kathleen has been with USDA-APHIS for over 20 years, first as an aquaculture epidemiologist, and then as the aquaculture coordinator in import-export services. Kathleen is stationed in Ruston, Florida, at the University of Florida Tropical Aquaculture Laboratory. She received a master's from the University of Maryland, Fish Nutrition, and both a DVM and PhD in aquatic animal pharmacokinetics from Virginia Tech. She has a courtesy assistant professor appointment at the University of Florida Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences. She has served on the Professional Standards, Technical Standards, and the HROC committees of the American Fisheries Society Fish Health Section, and was a certified AFS SHS Aquatic Animal Health Inspector. She is a current member and secretary on the board of the World Aquaculture Society, and is a past president of the U.S. Aquaculture Society. And I will now turn the webinar over to Dr. Hartman.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much, Liz, for having us and hosting us here today. As many of you know who know me, this is a passion of mine, and anytime I can get in front of all of you to talk about aquaculture and share what our amazing aquaculture team within Vet Services are doing, it's my total delight to be here. Let's see, here we go. All right. So the learning objectives for the next hour are hopefully to make some stickiness around why aquaculture is so great and why aquaculture is so critical for the United States. Trying to give you guys some cocktail time factoids so that we really, as people of this country, can dig in and talk about aquaculture in a science and informed manner. Also, the second objective for today is to understand the programs that your aquaculture team has been working so hard to develop. Those are the National Aquaculture Health Plan and Standards, as well as the Comprehensive Aquaculture Health Program Standards, and why these two initiatives are so important and provide the foundation for veterinary services to engage with our aquaculture farming community in the United States, as well as our trading partners around the world. So let's start with why aquaculture is important. Aquaculture is not the only solution to food safety and food security around the world, but it is a significant player in this field. And here on this slide, you see that the statistics by 2050, 50% more food will need to be produced to meet the global demand with our growing human population around the world. Aquaculture, again, can play a huge role in supplying very high quality and wholesome protein to the people on the planet. So let's look at the United States in terms of global aquaculture. We hover around the ranking of about 16 to 17. In 2016, the FAO had us listed at 18th or 17th in terms of global aquaculture production as a world player that way. You can see from that bar graph here on the slide that all of us in aquaculture were extremely excited and delighted in 2015 to see aquaculture, the supply of wholesome protein, really coming now from aquaculture. And we have seen that trend increase since that time as aquaculture becomes a viable source of protein for the world. And of course, we know that even our own USDA nutritional guidance recommendations include the increased consumption of seafood for all of our people here. And so that demand on aquaculture products, fisheries products continues to increase. And we're going to need both the supply from our natural environments and our farming communities to meet this increasing demand for protein around the world. Just a little bit of a reflection about what the global business of aquaculture looks like around the world. Fish protein accounts for about 17% of all animal protein consumed by the world. In comparison with goat and sheep, that's around 5% currently, and beef is at 24%. So you can see that aquaculture is still a relatively minor player, but a significant and important player if a deficit should occur in our other commodity streams. The compound annual growth rate is a reflection on the viability of business investment into the field or agricultural business of aquaculture. In 2022, that global value was around 290 billion US dollars and is projected to almost double in less than 10 years, which is super exciting. And you can see then the compound annual growth rates there. I lifted these from the internet yesterday. This gives a sense of the return on investment for investors in aquaculture. This is incredibly important as we begin to see the trends in global investment in aquaculture, but particularly in the investments in domestic aquaculture here in this country. We not only have businesses that are US farm businesses here investing, but we have a lot of also foreign investments into the aquaculture world, into the United States. That number of 5.5% in comparison to the other ones indicate that aquaculture is still a robust and viable, good return on investment commodity, and shows great strengths of growing continually over time. And we expect to see that CAGR number increase over time, particularly as our global population increases and the demand for seafood increases. Also, if we think about aquaculture, we are one of the most transboundary commodities around, not only because of our liquid environment, but how much our animals move around the globe and how quickly these animals move as well. In 2016, you can see some of the stats here on this slide that we really have seen a significant uptick in the amount of aquacultured animals that are entering into the trade throughout the world. This graph that is being shown here is specific for Vaname shrimp. That's predominantly the shrimp that end up on our dining tables. And you can see here where the lines connect the importers and the exporters, and you can see how connected all of us are through our aquaculture animals and our products. What's interesting about this too is that while this is for the end product, so it's packaged, farm-raised shrimp moving around the world in this particular diagram, but also if we looked at the role of the United States in this is, in the United States, our shrimp farming community is relatively small. Where we are robust and significant and a global player is the world is really relying on our farm-raised brood stock here in the United States, as well as our early life stages, those post-larval stages. We have the world's lion's share of those animals here in the United States. We are exporting brood stock to other countries for their breeding programs, but also we are supplying pretty much the world's PLs that are being grown out in other countries that then we are buying back as a packaged product coming into the United States. So I just want you to remember that and put a little pin in that. We are going to talk about the trade seafood deficit for the United States, but it's important to remember too that our farming communities are supplying the animals that we are buying back into this country. And so there is that connectivity and chain around the world that is very important. So I just take that seafood trade deficit with a little bit of grain of salt, because if we didn't have any trade deficit, some of our farming communities would suffer because of that. All right, so let's see, what is aquaculture? Aquaculture is sustainable agriculture. It provides food security for the world and the United States. It affords resource protection and provides rural and coastal enhancement through providing jobs and activities throughout the value chain of the aquaculture process. We've heard a lot of times, and I want to use parts of this talk to debunk some of the myths surrounding aquaculture and its impact on the environments that we're growing our animals in. But if you look at, for example here, fish and shrimp, we've got two livestock commodities that are really great at feed conversion, meaning that the food that we feed them is readily converted into an edible part of the product of the animal. The freshwater consumption certainly is a lot lower in some of our animals. And again, as a cocktail factoid, only marine fish actively drink in water. Our freshwater species are, of course, bombarded in that freshwater environment and are constantly trying to excrete all that excess water from their bodies. They don't actually have to actively drink in that water. But we can see also, in comparison to the other livestock sectors, the carbon footprint of aquaculture is relatively small here. And the protein retention and edible meat per 100 kilograms of feed are very robust, and in fact outperform some of our other traditional livestock species there. So again, the sustainability of aquaculture is reflected in these numbers about what a great energy conservation for the edible product that lands up on our table downstream. Specifically about US aquaculture, annually, it's around about a $1.5 billion industry in the United States. It supports over and almost 2 million jobs around the country. And you can see there that the food, fish, and mollusk species that are most found in our sales. And again, this is, of course, focusing on production aquaculture of our food fish species there. Catfish, sturgeon, tilapia, trout, and salmon, clams, oysters, and mussels on the mussel side there. Aquaculture, and I know I must sound like a broken record to many of you, but it is really one of the most diverse commodity sectors for livestock. And this is because of the diversity of species in production, the farming methods being used, and the diverse number of end uses that our animals and products are going for. But also, this is one of the most challenging areas of our livestock world too, because our aquaculture has really been born from a fisheries stocking management background rather than an agricultural background. And so I think aquaculture has missed growth and almost birth in the agricultural sector. And only now, within the last 20 to 30 years, are we recognizing aquaculture as a viable agricultural commodity. With that, though, we also see the impact of these diseases and pathogens of concern, not only domestically, but from our trading partners. And if we take a critical look at the WOA listed pathogens, of the 116 or 17 that are currently listed for all livestock species, 24% of that entire list are aquatic animal pathogens. Because of where aquaculture has come from the natural resource side, it has been viewed through the lens of risk with the lens of risk, that these animals that are being traded pose a risk to other resources, wild animals, those types of things. And so our farming community has been put in a position to demonstrate test results or a testing program that demonstrates freedom from not one, not two, not three, but like at times up to 18 pathogens at a time. Our farmers are having to show they're free of these pathogens. And that has caused a great burden that I will come back to later in this talk. This I clipped from a article that was online a couple of, I think it was last year. These are the top 15 states, I believe, with aquaculture production. If your state is not listed here, don't worry. I think there are only about 1 or 2 states that don't report any aquaculture activity, but these, of course, are the top 15. I do draw your attention, though, to that final column there of most common water source. I left that in there because it is interesting to see, if we look around the United States, what sources of water these sectors of the commodity are using. And this can give us a little bit of a mental picture about what risks might surround these different types of farming activities going on. Of this list, groundwater would be considered the most secure. Salt water is about a 50-50 depending on that source of salt water. And then, of course, the most risky water source on this list is the on-farm surface water. That could be from a natural water body feeding onto the farm, or pulling out of a river or stream going by the farm. So again, just to lock that picture in your brain, and we're going to talk a little bit about biosecurity in the next couple of slides. So again, reflecting back to those 4 things about aquaculture that make it pretty important, food security was number 2. And if we look at the picture of the United States, currently we still import over 85% of the seafood that ends up on our table. In 2022, that was about 3 million metric tons that were imported, had a value of about $30 billion. And already that's an increase above the preceding year. Now, COVID and the impact of COVID may have had some play into those numbers, but for the last 15, 20 years, ever since I've been involved in aquaculture, really, we have been reliant on the import of seafood. And as I mentioned, not always a bad thing, so it has to be taken with a little bit of grain of salt. But if we also look at where we most commonly get our imported seafood from, Asia, South America, those areas on our globe are also experiencing their own population growth, and it is predicted that those countries will have less seafood available to export because they will be retaining it for their own people to consume. We did see recently, within the last couple of months, a shift, and probably an important one that will take a while for us to realize or feel the impact of. But China, instead of being a net seafood exporter, has now recently become a net seafood importer, meaning that perhaps there are more opportunities, trade opportunities for some of our producers and exporters in this country. So that shift is going to be very interesting to watch what the impact downstream has to our aquaculture numbers. In the United States, our seafood, 75% of the seafood that we produce in this country or catch from our country waters is used for fresh or frozen human consumption. And you can see the further breakdown there, the other uses for fish meal and oil, frozen and canned products, and those types of things. But certainly we are reliant on the the products coming from both our wild caught and farm raised ventures. With that, one of the beautiful things about aquaculture, and one of the 4 things to keep in your mind if you need to talk about aquaculture, is aquaculture cannot feed the world by itself. We need the steaks and the chickens and the porks and everybody else, but we also need the wild harvest. It's got much more diversity than our farming community can grow. However, aquaculture and fisheries can work together. Aquaculture can be a way for us to relieve the fishing pressures off of our natural stocks out in the oceans. We can see from this slide, over 30% now of our populations in the oceans are completely overfished, not sustainable for future catches. The majority in that maximally sustainable field there, that is a constantly changing number there, but we can see we've put a lot of pressure on these natural populations of animals, and it's eventually going to impact their long-term survival on our planet as well. And so if we think about the current demand of seafood, the increasing demand of seafood, we need to figure out how aquaculture, the farming or culture of aquatic animals, can support and help protect our natural environments or populations of aquatic animals as well. So that's not only on our 4 things to remember about aquaculture, that aquaculture can help protect those natural wild populations, but also how we do aquaculture can help protect the health and security of our native populations within our domestic waters, both internal and around our country. So KTOD, I learned this in vet school, know this or die. So again, the 4 things to walk away from this half of the talk are: aquaculture is sustainable. It provides food security and independence for the United States. It can relieve fishing pressures off wild populations and provide species for conservation and stock enhancement. And of course, provides jobs and community strength and pride for those around it. If you've are in Maine or been to Maine or thinking of planning a trip, Maine has done some really exciting eco tours with their aquaculture industry partners. You can take a shellfish tour, eco tour around Maine. There's really a lot of pride and excitement around how aquaculture is impacting these local communities in terms of jobs. So why is aquaculture unique? And really, I think it comes down to these 3 simple pieces of information. We have over 600 species of aquatic animals in production around the world. If we look at our other traditional livestock species, those are typically hovering around maybe 50 to 100 species in production. And so you can see the vast diversity. And not only is this in fish, but we also have mollusks and we also have crustaceans. And so we've got a gamut of animals that are all incredibly different in physiology, environments, water quality parameters that they need to grow. And so it really is a diverse industry. We also have a number of end uses for the animals and products that are coming out. I've highlighted some in the text box here on this slide. And then, of course, like other sectors as well, we've got a diversity of farming methods. We've got the ponds, the tanks, cages or nets in the open ocean environments. We've got aquaponics, and then we also have these recirculating aquaculture systems, or what we call RAS. RAS are typically land-based facilities. They can be big or they can be small. They can be in the basement of a restaurant. It really has a diverse application there. With these, with these RAS systems as well, The water use, once we fill the systems with water, they only need to be topped off every so often. And so the water consumption is minimalized. The effluent from those facilities is also very minimal. So a minimal impact that way in terms of an environmental footprint. So also just to highlight, like other commodity chains, we have an aquaculture value chain that comes from the suppliers, the allied industry, the feed manufacturers, the equipment, professional services. One of the bottlenecks we see here in the United States right now is in the seed or egg production. We've got a number of species, perhaps the most prominent right now are our Atlantic salmon, where we don't have enough domestic broodstock to support all the companies that are needing these early life stages to grow out for food. And so we are seeing an uptick in the number of imports, particularly of these eggs, not only for fish, but also shrimp, we see now being imported into the United States. And of course, then you can follow the process chain that way, very similar to what it looks like for other commodity groups. Specifically for aquaculture, though, the challenges that our industry faces here are the regulatory environment, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Mostly that has to do with water usage, as well as the permitting and licensing process. But fish health or aquatic animal health does have a piece of that accountability as well. We do have a great deal of competition with imports, particularly with our catfish industry, with the Pangasius, the imported Pangasius or Bassa catfish that are coming in. Hopefully the labeling requirements to accurately label those products as imported through the cool process and inappropriate labeling practices. Both those things have worked to help strengthen the identification of imported seafood with domestically produced or caught seafood. That's important, but also just the overwhelming amount of production that goes on in other countries. The United States, as you remember, is a pretty minor player in the world. Talked about the seed supply, obviously having the markets available to sell these animals that are being grown on the farm. And of course, we have a very limited approved chemotherapy medicine box in aquaculture. Less than probably 8 chemotherapeutics are approved. Many have to be used off-label under the oversight of a veterinarian. And of course, we have vaccines. We have our USDA Center for Veterinary Biologics has, I think, maybe 6 vaccines that are approved to be used in the United States. Of course, we have many, well, we have at least one company that is making autogenous vaccines in a USDA vaccine facility. Those are proving, I think, to be very useful, not only in the United States, but around the world. And of course, then we have the vet exempt vaccines. I think given the societal pressures on wanting products that are antibiotic free, those types of requirements, I see the role and importance of vaccines really hitting this industry hard over the next few years. I expect to see many more vaccines on the market. So a couple of years ago, we worked with some of our stakeholders out there to really dig in what is the regulatory impact or scheme in the United States on aquaculture. The first one we assisted with was for the bait and sport fish. And you can see the yellow footprint there. Even though 5% does seem very small, what this did cue us into is that I initially thought that the impact of testing was because of the cost at the laboratory end. In fact, that wasn't really the biggest piece of this pie. It was all the pieces on the farm and the investment and costs on the farm to get to the samples to the laboratory for testing, the amount of labor, the time for a veterinarian to come and oversee the collection of those animals, the shipping and packaging of these animals if they have to be shipped out that way, or driven hours to a laboratory to see that. And so that really opened at least my eyes that this piece is not just about the cost of testing, but all the different pieces of that picture that play into the overall impact of what we are asking our farmers to do. The second regulatory study was in the salmonid industry. This is both for the salmon and trout species that we have in production. And you can see it might be a little hard to read on your slide, but that 7% fish health drops down to that purple farm, and it says, considered the most problematic regulation by the farmers. That just really hurt. And so clearly our stakeholders were identifying to us that we've got a problem in the United States, one, because of all the pathogens they're being asked to test for, the length of time and the amount it costs to conduct these tests are having an impact, particularly on our small businesses and our small farms. And so we were tasked then to begin to think of ideas and programs to address this issue. I submit to you guys that aquaculture is the only livestock commodity that has to kill healthy animals by the hundreds, sometimes thousands, in order to demonstrate health or to demonstrate the absence of pathogens. Remember, these are healthy animals and we are collecting them by the hundreds every time we need to go test. Also, in some of our commodities, for example, shrimp, cell culture is not possible because there's no cell lines. So all that testing relies on molecular methodologies, PCR, which are very expensive. And so some of our aquaculture producers, our farmers, are sustaining testing bills that are in the 20, 30, 40, $50,000. And that's one time, and they're being asked to do it either on a monthly interim or twice a year. You can clearly see that for some of our producers, that is not sustainable. And it really has impacted the growth of aquaculture in this country in a very detrimental way, I believe, because we just can't continue to put our farmers in a situation where they're not only losing those healthy animals, but money is flying out the window to verify animal health that really previously was a standalone assessment. And as soon as those animals left the farm, the confidence in those results was deteriorating very quickly. This is an old slide I took from Andy Goodwin, and it's just, you don't have to read it. It just demonstrates that in the United States, we have a confusing regulatory environment. Some states have aquaculture under the Department of Natural Resources. Some have them under the Department of Ag. Some states have no lead authority. We also have various guidelines that we are all following. Some follow the international WOA guidance. Some are following the domestic American Fisheries Society Blue Book guidelines. And then some states are implementing their own standards that deviate from both of those. And these are constantly changing. And it's really no wonder our farming community is frustrated that they cannot move their healthy animals more quickly, more efficiently, and with less costs. So what has USDA been doing to address that? What have all of us been doing to help with this burden? One thing is, and this is really where I think we need to start, is we have in 2008 had a national aquaculture plan that established a co-competency between USDA, US Fish and Wildlife, and NOAA. That plan really didn't work, largely because of the perception of risks And so in 2020, we had an opportunity under an executive order promoting American seafood and competitiveness and economic growth to re-examine that 2008 NAP and develop a new plan. And that's sure enough what we've done. It is now the National Aquaculture Health Plan and Standards. And you can see here the purpose of this new plan was to align aquaculture livestock under USDA as the lead authority for health, provide some infrastructure and consistency and harmonization for the testing that we're doing, which then impacts how we are able to collect that data and analyze that data, making sure we're talking apples to apples and not something different. Standardize the testing, establish reporting and surveillance, provide consistent and transparent health inspection options, all at the end of the day to make sure that the animals that are moving around this country that end up on our plates or are being stocked out into wild environments are all safe, free from diseases of concern, and are promoting a healthy One Health concept in the United States. Here you can see the elements of the plan that was in place from 2021 to 2023. We are currently updating this national plan. And so once we have the new plan rolled out, I imagine that these same chapters will be in there. They might be in a little bit of a different order and flushed out a little bit more. The importance of this national plan is that it does provide the infrastructure in the United States to do reporting, to make sure the labs that are participating in export health testing or testing to support a declared health status have laboratory quality management standards in place. Again, we also have testing standardization where we know how we're going to be pooling these animals. We have criteria around what methods are being used and what those cutoffs as an appropriate method might be. We have a structure for national biosecurity. Biosecurity has 3 levels: national, international, national, and then at the farm. This provides that national biosecurity, and I know Alicia and her team and SIA have been working together to do the risk pathways and the risk assessments so that we can implement with science and justification for import controls to protect our producers as well as our natural livestock. We've got a national surveillance system down that is coordinated with our state partners, also with our laboratories conducting that testing. And Alicia and the SIA folks are making sure that they're building these platforms so that data can come into APHIS to continue to support the claims of national freedom that we're on the precipice, first time that we're going to be able to do that. Emergency preparedness and response, making sure that we have contingency plans and authorities in place in peacetime before we have a critical need during wartime events, meaning disease outbreaks, not real war against the pathogens. Also, our industry sectors are very sensitive about confidentiality and data management. I wanted to be sure that our activities and how we manage that data are reflected in this document to provide confidence that we are doing everything we possibly can to maintain that confidence and integrity of the systems and data that we are asking them to share with us. And then, of course, education and training through our NVAP program and 2 new initiatives I'm going to share with you at the end of the talk. But this umbrella concept really, and this infrastructure of the framework of the national plan, when it's functional and open like an umbrella, it allows declarations of zones of country. It allows us to have health inspection programs like CAHPS. It allows food security, resource protection, all those great things then can exist once all these other pieces of the bigger puzzle are in place. Within the national plan, then you'll see options for health inspection processes that are backed by the USDA. And these are really important for our farming community to be able to market and brand their products and be able to move their products around the world. As you saw on the previous slide, CAHPS was one of the big cornerstones of those health inspection options. We have the information collection packet is open for public comment at the moment. That is the tool that we will be using to collect the CAHPS information from our farming communities. Again, if you need that notice, let us know and we'll send you that link so that you can provide it to folks to provide their comments back on that. Also, we hope within the next couple of months, CAHPS will enter the official rulemaking period as a voluntary program, very similar to our Scrapie program and CWD. Voluntary participation, but mandatory that if you elect to participate in it, you follow the program. Let's see. Again, this program was developed in joint partnership with our farming community and the National Aquaculture Association, again, to begin to reduce the regulatory burden of sampling and testing to move our animals. We recognized pretty early on that because of the diversity of aquaculture and all the pathogens of concern, that are globally required for movements and things, that we couldn't take a pathogen-centric model like Scrapie, like the NPIP, like CWD. We really needed a more comprehensive and broad and flexible because of the diversity of our industry. And again, we were asked to develop a science and risk-based flexible program that could recognize new innovations in testing, in animal health monitoring, all those things that it could stay fluid and current with the demands on our farming community. CAHPS is devised of 5 pillars, which you see here. Hopefully this is not the first time many of you are learning about the CAHPS program. The 5 pillars must be implemented by every participant in the program. If you guys would like a copy of these slides, but in order to save time for questions, I'm going to go through these pretty quickly. The aquatic animal health team is ultimately responsible to make sure that the declared health targets are being met and that the biosecurity practices are being done so that confidence in that testing has longevity beyond the samples going to the lab. The second pillar is risk-based evaluation, which consists of these 3 steps. The final step, of course, is a written biosecurity plan documenting the biosecurity practices and why those practices are believed to be effective against the pathogens of concern for the particular farm. In aquaculture, we have 5 pathways in most situations that pathogens can be introduced onto a farm. Everybody with me? Animals, water, feed, fomites, and vectors. So again, for the CAHPS programs, our participants have to go through each one of these pathways for each pathogen of concern and identify what is the critical control point and what is the mitigation process for that pathogen and pathway. The third pillar, early detection systems and specific pathogen surveillance. Early detection systems are what our farms are already doing in most cases. These are, you know, the gut feeling that you get about how the animals are doing. This is great for diseases that we know have a clinical expression in our populations and affords a continuous input of data about the health of these populations, recording of morbidity and mortality rates, feeding behavior, but also at this point, employing on a routine basis broad screening methods, using cell lines that are designed maybe to pick up SVC, KHV, those things, but would also perhaps catch emerging pathogens as well. Histology, things that we might miss with our PCR techniques because they're so specific, more broad evaluation of animal health. This also allows us to empower practices that we haven't quite figured out how to really regulate yet. Telemedicine, the video assessment of population health, and also the data from environmental sampling. What does that mean? How do we harness that information to lend power to what the farms are doing? In comparison, then, official surveillance is very intended and purposeful. We're looking for specific pathogens, typically has the oversight of an entity approved to do that sample collection. We're using approved assays in laboratories that we have oversight of. And we know then that the impact of pooling the assay do not have a negative impact, that we can be very confident of our negative results when they're being reported out. All right, we also have input and output testing targets. We have in this country, our farming community has been made accustomed to this count-based system of collecting 60 fish, 150 fish once or twice a year. And that's great. If that works for their customers, their buyers, or their regulators where they're shipping into, we're not looking to change that paradigm, but also recognize that that's not really hitting a designated health target all the time. It doesn't account for the impact of pooling or the performance of an assay if it's not a gold standard or a known diagnostic sensitivity. Whereas the output or confidence-based sampling, where we put a designated target and we know the assay that we're using, and we can sample animals to demonstrate health to that standard. It's a little bit of a mental shift, and we're working with our partners on the state level as well as our farming community to get ready to embrace that kind of approach. Pillars 4 and 5 are largely about disease investigation, knowing when to trigger in a disease investigation. We know in agricultural settings, animals die. It's Friday at 5:30. There's going to be a problem. It always happens. So, but when are those thresholds for morbidity and mortality exceeded, where we don't know what's going on? We think something might be going on, might be infectious, might not be, but how do we conduct that investigation and submit animals, and what is our on-farm response, and of course reporting if needed. And then of course, most important to our producers are, how are we going to get them back up in business and get that health status reestablished for their continuity of business. CAHPS will have basically 4 ways to participate in those. And of course, one of the big asks about this program was, let's get to a place where we can reduce the burden on our farms for this testing. How can we develop a statistical mathematical model that supports the reduction of sampling, but maintain that robustness and verification of animal health? And that's sure enough what the program has done. We do have a response mode when we have disease outbreaks. It'll be basically on a case-by-case basis, but we do have that footprint in the program because we know, again, on a Friday at 5, when I'm trying to get a beer, things are going to go wrong. This is just a quick glimpse of all these different options on the table for the CAHPS program. Also, I teased a little bit about the app that our SIA colleagues have been developing with us. Again, that open comment period is now. If you need that link, please let us know. The Know This or Die, here you go for the CAHPS and the NAHP&S pieces there. Take those with you. Please talk the talk. We really need help supporting both of these programs. Our farming community stands behind each of these 100%, which is really exciting. Before I turn it over for questions, I just want to highlight and give a huge shout out to the ever-growing aquaculture team. I am just delighted that we're all here together. We are an amazing group of people. And I think the beauty of this team is that we all see how we interact together. Everything that our different units do plays into this puzzle of what aquaculture health looks like in the United States. SIA is working on declaring country level freedom from our aquatic animal pathogens. It'll be the first time this country has ever been able to eliminate the need for our farming community to test for those pathogens. That's one way we are reducing that burden. SIA also is conducting risk and pathways assessment for the pathogens of concern. The importance of that work is that it provides our trade staff the opportunity to have justification of why import controls are needed, what commodity, what species we need to regulate for the protection of our farms and our natural resources. Improving our diagnostic testing platforms. NVSL is working with many of our partners on multiplex, multipath, pond-side diagnostics, so that again, this burden on having to use one molecular test for each pathogen, we can begin to combine those, again, reducing that burden. Lynn and Stephanie working with our FIOPS people for those EPI investigations and getting EMERS to a place where it works for aquaculture reporting. Awesome, you guys. We also have 2 new initiatives on an aquaculture outreach campaign with our LPA colleagues. We have an aquaculture training in development to support CAHPS with a Texas A&M who has done the FAD manual and all that. So we're really beginning to be able to put on our big boy and girl boots and become the commodity sector that I know other commodities has set the bar for. And of course, we're starting a new initiative about state level communications, reaching out to those on the natural resource side and the ag side. Let's talk about these programs. What are their challenges? What do they see? What do they need from APHIS to support them? Finally, too, if you haven't seen it yet, please check out the state regs map. This was a huge ask for many, many years. We couldn't figure out who was going to do it, but when our mapping people were able to put this in place for us, and Dr. Michelle Walsh is working with everybody around the country to make sure that the information we have in this tool is accurate, up to date, and it is a tool that is working for our industry members. So please check that out. And with that, you guys, I think I've left 5 minutes for questions, but as always, open door to anybody on our aquaculture team. I know that we all love hearing from everybody. All right, Liz, I'm done. I'll turn it back over to you for the floor. Or
great job,
chat.
Kathleen. Yes, great job, Kathleen. We do have a couple questions. One thing I just want to remind everybody is that I did just put in that link that you asked. You talked about the state regulations for domestic movement. That's in the chat, so you can all copy that. And then before I take any questions, I'm also going to ask you, please, to check out the link that I've put in there for our evaluation for this webinar. It's in the chat, so someone said they can't see it, but I put it in the chat for everyone. So let's go ahead and start taking the questions. And we have time, as long as everybody wants to stick with us, we definitely have time to do that.
Okay.
The first question is, are there government incentives for people to start a business in aquaculture?
That is a great question. Yes, and actually, so that is, wow. So yes, our ARS colleagues under the leadership of Dr. Karen Rexroad, and on the subcommittee of aquaculture from the NSTC level, is developing these strategic documents and goals and objectives to incentivize aquaculture development in this country. I think we have a long way to go, but I know ARS is getting ready to release that document that has a lot of different goals and objectives on how to incentivize aquaculture investment in this country. And of course, that includes our FSA, Farm Service Agency programs that now recognize the support of our aquaculture commodities when disasters hit those different sectors. So I'd be happy to expound more, but I think there is the answer to that in some of these other documents, and I'm not able to get them off my tongue at the moment. But there are. And whoever asked that question, if you want to email me, I'll send you what's going on to do that.
And also, I can save the chat and let you know.
Awesome. Thank you, Liz. Also, too, we had a resolution come out of USAHA this past October about indemnity for aquaculture. Many of you will recognize that indemnity or aquaculture was not, aquatic animals were not recognized in the 2024 indemnity tables. And so we have an ask both from the SAHOs and the Aquaculture Committee under USAHA to consider indemnity and how USDA might do that for aquaculture, an important piece for security of investment.
Great. The next question is, what is the aquaculture industry doing to address microplastics in the food chain?
Wow, another really great question. So that's also, I've seen a couple of articles come out recently about the depuration of oysters from microplastics. And there does seem to be effectiveness of allowing those oysters to clear any microplastics that might be in their system. Of course, they're filter feeders, right? So whatever's in their aquatic environment there's a depuration process for that. I think if I read it correctly, it was 14 days, something like that. I don't know if anybody from industry is on. Otherwise, I mean, I think it is an issue both in the farming environments out in our ocean environments. What is the impact of microplastics going to be on the wholesomeness of food coming from those environments? And also, you know, would depuration periods work to clear those from the systems of our animals? It's a great question, you guys, but I'm happy to provide links to those newer microplastic papers that are coming out.
The next question is, do aquaculturists ever combine fish species and oyster species on their farms to allow the oysters to clean up the water around the fish?
Some do. Some of those environments might not be suitable for both species, but what we call polytrophic aquaculture, where we've got the different trophic levels in the aquatic environment between the fish and the shrimp, or the fish and oysters. It has been done. I think it's employed more in other countries than it is here. I can't speak to why that might be, but we do see a lot of interest and a lot of growth of the polytrophic aquaculture scenarios. Mostly in this country, though, I think we're combining shrimp with fish. I don't know of too many farms that combine the mollusks with the fish, but they might be out there.
The next question is, should there be in a catastrophic event or / disease, is there a disposal plan required similar to a flock plan?
Not yet. And, you know, the other thing about aquaculture too is that we don't have many, if any, diseases that are zoonotic from an animal product. So, you know, if we look at, you know, what's happening with high path avian influenza and the concern about ASF, and not that ASF is zoonotic per se, but we do have a little bit of a different situation there with aquatics. Could we do controlled marketing? Are there alternative things that those animals could be used for, rather than just doing a large depopulation? I think our team, particularly Lynn and Stephanie and our emergency response corps, are thinking about that. How would we manage a large scale depopulation for aquaculture? We've done it in the past with great success, lots of frustration, but we got the job done. So it's an interesting question. I don't think we're there yet with a broad contingency plan. Of course, the AVMA has the guidance on euthanasia that includes aquatics, and they also have aquatics included in their depopulation guidance as well. But it is something certainly that we're working on. And if Lynn or Stephanie or Nancy, you guys want to say anything about the emergency contingency plans?
That's okay. I'll call you later. Okay.
No. Okay.
Okay, we do have another
Liz,
question.
without-
Yep. Go ahead. Do you know if issues cause aquaculture facilities by the presence of feral swine?
I'm sorry, Liz, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, so we have one person that just keeps coming off mute. Do you know if there are issues that are caused aquaculture facilities by the presence of feral swine?
No, I don't. I mean, obviously these wild animals can get in the ponds and muck them up, but sometimes livestock, cows, goats, sheep are used around aquaculture farms to keep the embankments mowed down, if you will. I don't know of any direct concerns with feral swine, but maybe some of our wildlife services people might know.
Okay, so the last question we're going to take is it true to understand that surveillance is voluntary and is done by farmers? Like, what role does APHIS play in monitoring and surveillance of WOHA reportable aquatic diseases?
Wow, another great question. So APHIS's role in that, obviously, so most of our farming communities are engaged in the movement of aquatic animals, whether that's domestic or international. And those farms have all this data about the testing they are doing for the pathogens of concern for their clients, their regulators, where they're moving their animals into. Where APHIS and vet services and the structure of the NAHP&S and the CAHPS programs are trying to go is to harness all this information that is out there so that we can make claims based on this farming data and then surveillance that is being done in our wild populations with our partners like U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. They are also conducting surveillance of the animals or pathogen testing on those animals that are being stocked out. And so we don't necessarily have a surveillance plan for wild animals, although we are currently supporting and have supported the surveillance of wild animals. For example, we just have a brand new agreement for the surveillance of some shrimp pathogens in the Gulf of Mexico and in the East Coast with the University of Arizona. All those information streams and different projects all begin to build this data that is going to be used to support the Declaration of Freedom or the creation of zones within this country. We know we have a lot of pathogens that have a split status within this country. Either the split is between it existing in the wild and not on our farms. For example, VHS4B is an example of that. Or we've got a difference between west of the Rockies and east of the Rockies. For example, IHN, which is a WOA reportable one. We know it's rather widespread in the west and not really ever detected in the east. And so we're working on our teams to figure out how to structure that and how do we set where those zones or lines should be, and then how do we maintain the collection of data to maintain those claims, whether it's an endemic zone or an infected or provisionally free or free zone. So you'll begin to see all these types of efforts emerge from our aquaculture team in VS across the board, where we're trying to figure this out for aquaculture still, but that's definitely where we're going. Again, working with our wild partners on U.S. Fish and Wildlife and looking at their collected data so that we can make a claim about the wild populations, and then working with our approved laboratories and the new laboratory approval process to begin to collect that negative testing data, which we haven't had a way to collect before now, but we will moving forward. And so we can begin to maintain those. So yeah, the on-farm surveillance is not mandated by APHIS. Of course, if our farms are having to move animals across state lines or to different countries, those countries establish those requirements and what surveillance needs to be done on those farms to make them legitimate or able to move. The grand dream of CAHPS and NAHP&S as well is that recognition of when we have that infrastructure in place, it has confidence and integrity. And then if a participant in the CAHPS program, instead of having to do lot-based testing or monthly testing, can we get our farms to a place where folks recognize that, okay, for this 6 months block, we've got the surveillance done that meets an identified health target, we've got the biosecurity pathways, and we've got the mitigation practices to provide high confidence that, you know, over this set period of time, there will not be an introduction of disease. And if there is, we've got the early detection systems in place to recognize it, hopefully before those animals move or are stocked out. So again, it's all those pieces of the puzzle beginning to build that picture.